Hello, my friends. I hope that you're all fine. It is the second week that I don't know that why the link doesn't work for your friends. Anyway, I have tried it on my own laptop and it worked, but I don't know that why it doesn't work for your friends. Okay. Um, you see, yes, you're all smart that if the link doesn't work, so the easiest way is that you go to my channel and then definitely it shows me that I am online. Um, they can ask them to search for your name. Yes, exactly. They have to go to my channel. So it is, yes, you're all smart. I think all of you, like last week, most of you, you find it just through my channel. But anyway, I don't know that why the link is working for me. I have tried it on Times, I've tried it on Telegram, it is opening for me. But it seems that the rest, they have trouble of finding it. So what's up? Until the others, they can join us. Can you please write for me that how was your week? Yeah, I changed the link. Yeah, you subscribe to my channel. Thank you so much. Where should I sit until you can see this chat box? Yeah. Okay, my friend, how was your e-learning experience so far? 30 viewers. We have another 30 more to go. Morning. So far it's been different. First time Fahad is on time. Yes, Sharon, thank you so much. Fahad, what happened that you're on time? Ethan, what has been different? It's been different means what? What has been different? E-learning, you mean? Hello, Sophia. Good morning. Always on time, bro. Yes, Fahad is always on time, but Fahad being on time is just half an hour different from us. Good morning. It's kind of different from the day-to-day experience. Yes, it is different. It is somehow stressful for us. We discuss among the lecture. It is stressful, but personally, I prefer it to the face-to-face. It is stressful because I want to make sure that I can deliver the topics well, but it's a kind of new experience because it has a lot of learning, so that's why I like it. Um, it's different for us specifically that we are teaching the same subject. Our job can be a bit like boring, but this has made it a really big change for us. So that's why I like it. We are developing new skills, and then every day I'm studying that how can XP, how can improve my delivery. So from that aspect, yeah, it's different. Okay, guys, if you agree, so we have 34 viewers. I don't know where are the rest. Let me check via Telegram. Okay, I think I better start. So ready, we go for our slides, and then we have some videos, then we have quiz activity. The topic is, again, I'm sure that you had the topic previously in your previous module. It is not a new topic, but as usual, after discussing about the topic, we're gonna go a bit deep in it with bringing more of the real word examples. So let's go to our slides. Why don't you see all of it? You can see properly. Okay. So the topic of today is the risk and term structure of interest rate. So previously we discussed about the interest rate in the bond market and the behavior of interest rate in the money market or liquidity framework. Now we want to know that why the interest rate for different securities and particularly in our topic for different bonds are different. So we want to know the factors affecting the difference of the interest rate. So to cover this, so we are studying the interest rate from two different aspects. So the first aspect is the risk structure of interest rate, and the other one is the term structure of interest rate. Do remember that the word term always means time. So that's why whenever we are talking about the term structure of interest rate, means that we have the bonds that are different in terms of the timing. Timing means that our bonds are different in terms of the time to maturity. Some bonds are short in maturity, so it means that there are shorter term bonds, and some bonds are long term bonds. The other factor which is affecting the difference in interest rates of different securities is that the risk of the different securities. So it means that if we want to talk about the risk structure, we assume that we are talking about those type of bonds that they have the same term. So it means that we assume that in the risk structure, the terms of the bonds are the same. And once we are talking about the term structure, we assume that the risk of the bonds are the same. So it means that they have the same issuer. That's why the risk is the same. So then, once we want to talk about the risk structure, means that we assume that we have different bonds, but the maturity of all the bonds is the same. For example, all of them, they get mature in 10 years. So the factors which is affecting all bonds with the same maturity to have different level of interest rate can be categorized in 3 different sections. The first is a default risk, then is liquidity, and the last factor is tax consideration, which is causing bonds to have different interest rate. So to explain about the default risk, I play one video for you. That the video is recorded in a Lightboard studio in Taylor's. And the time that I recorded this video, I had no idea that such a thing is going to happen, and this video is going to be so useful. But that time it was a Chinese New Year, and then the campus was less crowded, so I took the advantage of a good timing, and then I wanted to prepare some videos as a supplement for my classes, because that time we didn't know that we're going to be trapped in next few months. But I wanted to use it as a supplement material, but now you can see that this online has become the main delivery. So I'm using it here, so then later on I get your opinion that whether you like the quality, and then I have provided the detailed explanation about this. So we listen to the first video, which is on default risk. So let's go. Hello my friends. Our today topic is about risk structure of interest rate. We have discussed till now that we have different type of interest rate which are associated with different type of bonds. It means that we have the variety of the bonds in the market, and each bond has the specific interest rate. So we want to discuss that what is the reason of having different interest rate regarding for different bonds. So actually to discuss, to know that the relationship between different type of the interest rate, we have to know that what are the factors that are affecting the behavior of interest rate in the market. So having said that, the topic of various interest rate can be discussed in 2 sections. The first section, which is the topic of today, is the risk structure of interest rate. In this section, we assume that the bonds that we want to focus about are those bonds with a same maturity. So we call that the term structure of these bonds are the same. The term here means the time, means the maturity of these bonds. Why are we fixing the term or the maturity of these bonds? Because of the simple reason that if the term or the maturity of the bonds are different, definitely we expect different interest rate. Assume that we have 1-year bond and then we have 30-year bond. So which one do we expect to have the higher interest? Of course, the longer term bonds, they have higher interest. So that's why if we are assuming that different bonds, they have the different maturity, because we want to know that the effect of the time is excluded at the moment, and we want to know that what are the other factors rather than time affecting the different interest rate associated with every bond. So that's why we call it that this is the risk structure of interest rate, means that whatever factor which is about the risk associated with different bonds. For example, we know that bonds are issued by different corporations or even by treasuries or by governments. So that's why the risk associated with the bonds are different. For example, the type of the bonds that are issued normally by governments or by treasury of every country, they are the safest bonds. The safe bonds are the bonds that we call them default-free bonds or default risk-free. Why we call default risk means that the risk of the default of these bonds is 0. Default risk means defaulting of a bond means that the issuer of the bond is unable or unwilling to pay the payment and the maturity or the face value of the bond at the maturity. So it means that if a bond is
default risk free means that we are 100% sure that the issuer won't default on the payment. It will pay the payment on the on yearly basis, and in the maturity they will pay the face value of the bond. On the other side, we have different kind of corporations that are issuing the bonds, but they are having some risk. For example, the airlines of Northwest Airlines in 20,000, during that mid-20,000, they defaulted on many bonds. Later on, even in 2011, the American Airline, they defaulted on some other bonds. So it means that once the risk of the default is associated with kind of bonds issued by corporations, those corporations, they have to hire the higher rate of interest to motivate the investor to buy that bonds. So it means that now we are talking about a kind of interest, which is the interest associated with default risk-free bonds. Default risk-free means that there is no risk with this kind of bonds. And there are some other corporations that there is a default risk with that corporation. So it means that the interest, the gap between these two types of interest is called risk premium. Risk premium by nature is actually a kind of interest rate. So it means that the name is somehow misguiding us that it is a risk, but actually the risk premium is interest rate. So it means that the risk premium is the difference between the risk-free, default risk-free bonds and with the interest rate of the bonds that they have the risk of defaulting. So if we want to illustrate this concept of risk premium, so we can use the demand and supply of the bond, so we can draw them for two different scenarios. So in the first scenario, we assume that, for example, this market is the corporate market. And then we assume that this side, for example, is treasury bond market. Why treasury bond market and corporate market? Because we know that the treasury bonds are the safest bond, are risk-free bonds. Why? Because the government is issuing them, and in case that they have any financial problem, the government is facing any budget problem, they have two ways to finance this budget problem. What are the two ways? The first is that the government can raise the taxes. The other way is that the government can, for example, work closely with the central bank, and they request the central bank to issue some bonds, to issue some money, and then through issuing the money they can finance the bond, and that's why the default of the bonds is almost zero. So now okay, we assume that we have these two markets, and then we want to draw demand and supply of the bond that these two markets are issuing. It's making a noise, so I changed them. So we know that this excess is demand, these two excess, since I want to draw demand and supply of the bond. So this one is the price of the bond, and here is the quantity of the bond. The same is price of the treasury bills, and here is the quantity of treasury bills. Then I draw, here is a demand of corporate bonds. I will show you with this C, and then it is supply of corporate bonds. Then I draw the same thing. We know that the intersection of demand and supply is showing us the price. I'll show it with PC1. And then I assume that at initial level, for example, at E1, equilibrium 1, I assume that the price of the bonds, corporate bonds, and the price of the treasury bills are the same. So that's why I draw demand and supply in a way that the price will be the same for both of them. So now here is the demand of a treasury. So here is demand 1 and supply 1, and then is supply of treasury, for example, first one. And here is equilibrium 1. Then you can see that at this situation, since the price in both market is the same, so that's why we know that in the bond market with every price there is one associated interest rate. So that's why we know that now that the price of bonds in these two markets are the same, it means that the interest rate of the both market are the same. So it means that the interest rate of the corporate bond at the moment is exactly equal to interest rate of the treasury bond. So is PT1. Okay, what will happen that, let's say that there will be the outbreak of a news in the market that this corporate, they have defaulted on the bonds. So it means that they are unable to pay the interest. So once this news is out, so it means that this bond is facing, the people who are demanding these bonds are facing a risk, default risk. And that's why the demand for these bonds relative to the other bonds will be less. So this bond will be less desirable. Based on the theory of portfolio choice, once there is a risk of default for any bond, the demand for that bond will be decreased. So now it means that the demand of this bond, corporate bond, will shift to left. I don't know, can you distinguish between these two colors? Hopefully yes. And it's gonna be the new equilibrium point. And then we have the price, new price of the corporate bonds, which we call it P2. At P2, we know that with every associated price in the bond market, there is one associated interest rate. So that's why I call it interest rate of the corporate bond, and this is the second interest rate. This interest rate, which was the interest rate of the corporate bond, 1 was exactly equal to interest rate of the treasury bonds in situation 1. So in this situation, now that the price of the corporate bonds has decreased, so it means that this interest rate, it has increased. So it means that in this situation, we know that interest rate of the corporate bond, its second situation, is bigger than interest rate of the corporate bonds in the first situation. So it means that before the default risk, so the interest rate has been lower. Now that the outbreak, because of the outbreak of this default risk news in the market, so the interest rate has increased. So what will happen? The people that previously they were interested in the corporate bonds, so now they have lost the desire towards this kind of bonds and they like to invest in treasury bond market. Why? Because of course they know that this bond is the safest type of the bond, and the government, the probability of government on treasury defaulting of the bond is almost zero. So that will cause the demand for treasury bonds to increase. So that's why based on the theory of portfolio choice, the return of this kind of bonds will be relatively higher than the return on this market, and that's why demand for treasury bills will increase. With increase, so we know that the price of the treasury bill will be higher. Once the price of a treasury bill, treasury bonds in the market is increasing, so it means that the associated interest rate with these treasury bills will be lower, because we know that there is the inverse relationship between price and interest rate. Here in this situation, the interest rate, as we mentioned before, interest rate of the treasury in situation 1 has been equal to interest rate of the corporate bonds in situation 1. But now what is happening here? That the interest rate is decreasing. Can you see the difference between interest rates now? So we started from this point that the interest rate of both markets, both bonds, they have been the same, and see that what is happening now. The situation here that the interest rate here is very low at this situation, and the other interest rate is here, which is very high. So if we consider this difference here, so the difference between IT2 interest rate with IC2 interest rate, this gap is called risk premium. As you can see, this graph is showing risk premium has the nature of interest rate. So it means that risk premium is the difference between the interest rate of the higher return bonds because of the risk with the interest rate of the risk-free bonds. This is the concept of risk premium. So now to conclude this session, we can say that one of the factors affecting the different risk, different interest rate on different bonds, once we assume that the term or the maturity of the bonds are the same, is default risk. And in the default risk topic, we introduce the concept of the risk premium. To continue further, we can say that the second factor which is affecting to have different interest rate related to different bonds is called liquidity. So I put here the second factor is liquidity. Liquidity concept, it means that how fast you are able to sell your bonds. It means that how much demand, immediate demand is available in the market for your bonds. For example, if you are holding a treasury bond, since treasury bonds is very famous and is very well known, so if you want to cash your bond, you want to sell your bonds, you can easily find a demander or a purchaser in the market. However, for the corporate bonds, since it happens that sometimes they are not very safe and they have this default risk with them, so that's why normally it happens that you need more time. So in other way, we can say that treasury bonds are more liquid than the corporate bonds. So once we are talking about the liquidity, automatically we know that liquidity is linking us to the concept of demand for the bonds. So it means that if again we want to start from the equal situation like we started before, and we assume that the price and therefore the interest rate of both markets are the same, we can discuss about the liquidity of the market. So we can say that once there is a news of default in the market, so the liquidity of one market will be affected. So since this bond will be less liquid, so this bond will be less desirable in the market and the demand will shift to left. With shift of the demand, the price of the bond will be less and therefore the interest rate will increase. And this other way around, exactly other scenario is happening here, that once again the liquidity of one market will be less, so the people are more interested to have the bonds of the other market. So it means that the treasury bonds will be more liquid. Now that they are liquid, it means that the demand will shift towards right, and again we're going to have the higher price. Higher price is associated with lower interest rate. And again, the gap between different type of interest rate that we were discussing is appearing. So again, we can say that any factor which is causing the difference between two type of bonds, the difference between interest rate of two type of bonds, if this difference between interest rate is associated with default risk or associated with liquidity, this gap is called risk premium. So it means that the concept of risk premium sometimes is called risk liquidity premium. So it means that both they have the same meaning, risk premium or risk liquidity premium. So it means that it's a kind of difference which is derived because of the difference in risk and difference in liquidity. But of course, in most of the books, they summarize, they prefer the abbreviated format, so that's why instead of risk liquidity premium, they use the risk premium. So I hope that it is clear.
Okay, my friends. So we are in the topic of risk structure of interest rate. With the video that you watched, so we have discussed about the concept of default risk and then liquidity. So now you look at this graph and you can see that the graph is showing the different interest rate on different type of the bonds. So as you can see here, so let's carefully look at this graph and let's see that what we can understand from this graph. You can see that most of the time, but of course not all the time, most of the time, this municipal bond, you can see here, they have the lowest level of interest rate. Of course, we have the exception like this area as well, that the municipal bonds, they have the higher interest rate. But in overall, again, you can see that the municipal bond have the lowest interest rate. And after that, this is the US long-term bonds, which is the treasury actually. So after this, you can see that the second level of the interest is the US treasury. And as you can see, these corporate BAA bonds, they have normally the highest interest rate. So what you can understand here is that when we are talking about AA bonds, corporate AA bonds and corporate BAA bonds, imagine that we don't know anything. Just what we can understand is that since the interest rate of these BAA bonds are higher, so we assume that these corporations are riskier compared to AAA corporations. And then if we want to know, the only thing that we want to know, so here we know about the risk, but since this is the state or local government bond and this one is the federal government bond, so we want to know that what is the difference, why this interest rate between these two bonds are different. Actually, both of them relatively are safe because either the state government or the federal governments are issuing them, but still we can see the difference between interest rates. So that is the factor that we want to know. So we continue and we will answer this question. Okay, about the default risk, so we have discussed, even we introduced the concept of risk premium. So this was whatever I explained in the video, and then you can find it in your slides as well. And then it is a comparison between mortgage-backed security and treasury bonds during the crisis of 2009. We're going to discuss again further about an article for this until we reach to this slide. This slide is showing you that in here we have discussed about risk, right? So we want to know that whether is there somewhere, is there any report that we can refer to that report, and based on that report we can understand that, for example, what companies or what kind of bonds they are the safe and what kind of companies they are risky. Yes, we have three main organizations in US that they are called S&P, Standard & Poor, Fitch, and Moody. So these three corporations are very famous. You can refer anytime to their reports, and they have categorized different companies based on the risk. When a company, for example, is AAA, so of course they use different type of like rating, but they have the same, they are following the same requirement and the same criteria to rank these different organizations. When one corporation is ranked AAA, so it means that this is the safest type of corporations and the risk of the default is almost zero. Then once we move from top of the list to the bottom, so of course the degree of the risk is increasing until we reach, for example, to like BAA corporations. So of course they are much riskier than AAA corporation. And that's why in previous example in this graph here, you could see that these BAA bonds, so the interest, the blue line is higher than AAA bonds, so the interest is lower. So that was the reason, right? Because based on this rating of the corporations, these BAA bonds, in order to motivate the people, they have to offer higher interest rate. But one point about this rating is that we don't know that how true it is, how trustable it is. For example, if it is a normal scenario, everything is fine, the economy is growing, so maybe the rating is working very well. But however, in terms of the crisis, so there was a lot of debate that how true are the ratings. So we have one article regarding this that we're going to discuss again later. Then you can see here that I have explained for you that before the outbreak of 2009 global crisis, we know that we have the collapse in the subprime mortgage market. And many of the investors, and they say that this subprime mortgage, once you refer to the ranking, it is ranked as the safest. So once there is a collapse in the market, so many have started to saying that, so the ranking has been wrong ranking. Otherwise, so for these companies, since they are the safest, they should have enough backup to cover the debt. So that's why once they say that these companies, they didn't have enough backup and they have done the risky activity, so it means that the rating has been wrong. And this debate is still continuing about the rating of the companies. Then the second factor we discussed was about the liquidity, and the last factor is income consideration. So this is, once we cover the income consideration, is another factor which is affecting the interest of different bonds. So again, I have recorded one video. So if you agree, we go and we watch to the second video, which is about the income tax consideration and how it is affecting the different level of interest rate for different bonds. So let's go. So far we discussed about two factors which are affecting the risk structure of interest rate. The first factor was default risk and the second factor was liquidity. Now we want to discuss about the third factor, which is tax consideration. Again, you want to compare two kinds of bonds. The first kind of bond is the municipal bonds, which is issued by local or state governments, and the other one is the treasury bills, which is issued by federal government, and we say that this is the default-free bonds. So for municipal bonds, the history has shown that the state or the local governments of different various parts of the US specifically, they have the history of defaulting on the bonds. So that's why what we know is that we want to compare these two bonds. So this kind of bonds is relatively riskier compared to this kind of bonds. So what we expect about the interest rate of these two bonds, we expect that the interest rate of the municipal bonds should be higher than the interest rate of the treasury bonds. But what the real data and the real example is showing is that the interest rate of municipal bonds is lower than the treasury bonds. So we want to know that why. While the situation is in a way that these bonds are riskier, and based on the previous discussion that we had, we expect that the riskier bond, the interest rate should be higher. So why in this scenario the municipal bonds are riskier and yet their interest rate is lower than the treasury bonds? So that's why the third factor is coming into the picture, which is the income tax consideration. We know that, let's start with this example that we are earning very high, we are in the high income brackets, that we are supposed to pay the 40% of income tax. So it means that for every 10, for example, dollar extra that we are earning on the bond, so we have to pay $4 of that as a
as a tax, and only $6 is remaining for us. So now imagine that the situation that this for the treasury bonds, whatever you are earning, you have to pay the tax for that, but the municipal bonds are in a way that they are tax exempted. So it means that whatever you are earning, even if you are in high income brackets and you are supposed to pay the tax, but if you buy this kind of bonds, then it is tax exempted. So whatever you are earning on this, it will be neat for yourself, and you don't need to touch, you don't need to pay anything as a tax. So we can start with this example that, let's say that, for example, we have a bond with face value of 1,000, for example, and then if the treasury bonds are, for example, the interest rate of the treasury bonds here on 10%, and the interest rate of the municipal bonds, so I called IM, and then here I put IT. So here is 8%. So we want to compare that, how much is our income. If we buy these treasury bonds or having the face value of 1,000, we are earning, for example, 100 in a year, and out of this 100, $40 we have to pay as a tax, and only, for example, $60 is remaining for us. In this situation, since it is tax exempted, if we buy the municipal bonds, the face value of 1,000, so we are earning $80, and this $80 is tax exempted. So the remaining amount for us here is higher than the remaining amount for us here. So now we want to know that, we want to show based on the graphical illustration that how this variety or this difference in interest rate is happening in these two bond, in these two markets. Again, we start with demand and supply of the bond in these two markets, and then like the previous example, we imagine that in the initial level, the price of the bonds in both markets are the same. It's making noise. Whatever I'm changing, the markers still are making noise. S, treasury, and then it is D, treasury. Here is the initial price of the treasury. So I assume that the price is the same at initial level, so it means that it is the price of municipal bond at initial level. So I draw demand and supply in a way that the price is remaining the same. This is S, M. So since this market is tax exempted, so of course, since the earning, this example is showing you that the earning in this market is higher, so that's why the demand in this market is going to decrease. And the price is going to decrease. How about this market? The demand in this market is going to increase, and that's why the price in this market is going to increase as well. So now we know that with every price there is one associated interest rate. So interest rate, since price has decreased, interest rate in second situation has increased. And in this situation, since the price has increased, the associated interest rate has decreased. So that's why, that is justifying that why the interest rate of the municipal bond is lower than the interest rate of treasury bonds. So you can see again the change in the interest rate in these two markets. Do remember that in this scenario, since the change of interest rate is not associated with the default or with any risk, so that's why this difference in interest rate is not called risk premium. So only with this illustration we are showing, we are justifying that why the interest rate in this market is higher than the interest rate in the other market. But this difference is not showing the liquidity or premium risk. I hope that the topic is very clear. Thank you.
Okay. So far we completed the risk structure of interest rates. So we have discussed about these three factors, and this illustration in your slides was exactly like the illustration that you saw in the video. Do remember that step by step, like whatever I explained. So you have to remember that in case you're asked to explain the difference in the interest rate due to any of these factors, so you have to be able to show the movement of the bonds demand and supply for different markets, for the treasury and for the corporation, or for the treasury and for municipal bonds. Then one example I have prepared here, that you remember that Obama increased the tax rate on high income people from 35% to 39%. And then the increase in income tax rate, of course, for wealthy people, it helped to lower the interest rate on municipal bonds. And it was the time that, if you remember, it was the time that they wanted to lower down the interest rate in the market in US, specifically because the amount of the inflation was very high, so they wanted to control the inflation. So that's why one of the factors to control the inflation was to bring down the interest rate. So how to bring the interest rate? Of course, they were supposed to impose some amount of the tax to these high income brackets people to make sure that the demand for the municipal bond is going to be affected, and therefore the interest rate decreased. Then, if you agree, if you understood this, so let's do one quiz together, and after the quiz we move on to the term structure of interest rate. Okay, so let's go to the quiz. Okay, my friends, to start a quiz, again, I have extracted the quiz questions from piece of articles. The articles I have posted on your Times, and then of course for each question I have posted the relevant part, I have pasted the relevant part of the article in the question itself. But in case you want to have the access to the article, I have pasted and the introduction and the conclusion of the article. That was the most important part. So that's why the file is not that heavy. If you want to go to your Times, you can refer to your Times and you can get the articles there. Otherwise, you can directly come to the quiz. Okay, let me share my Chrome with you if it is working. Do you see my Chrome? I think you don't see the Chrome. Then I have to share my whole desktop with you. Let me see. I think now you have to be able, because my Chrome was not working. So let's see whether you're able to see my desktop now. For example, I go to risk structure of interest rate. I want this quiz. And then I go to play live. I continue to the classic format. Yeah. Okay, if you can see my desktop, so you please go to joinmyquiz.com, and this is the code. Just to check whether you're able to. Are you able to see it? Nobody has joined. We had 50 viewers in YouTube, so why only 34? $42, still I expect more. You can see. Okay, nobody else? So only 42 of you? So nobody else, last call. Last call for the quiz. So shall we start? Okay, I start. Some of my friends here, what are they doing? Suresh and Maggie. Suresh, Maggie, please. So, Suresh, Maggie, and Nasiha, we are waiting for you. Okay, everybody is almost done. So, 3, 2, 1, and the game. Okay, so apart from Kiran, the rest you put the student number, and I don't know who were the champions. Okay. So Kiran, you have answered all the questions. Have you re-attempt some of them? Or it was the first attempt? Kiran and then 3 other friends, Akil and 2 more, that they have attempted all questions correctly. So was it the first attempt or you attempted a few times? And some of my friends, they didn't answer anything. Okay, let's review the questions. Guys, my setting in OBS didn't work, so that's why I wanted to just share this screen with you, but I couldn't, so that's why I have to share my whole screen with you. Then once a while I have to go and to check that whether you have written any comment or not. Means the timer is too fast, couldn't read the whole question. Means I played the game again with new username, so it was, oh, okay, got it. Okay, Ethan, for the next time I can increase the timing, but anyway, the article is available in the Times, so you can refer and you can study the articles again, and you can get back to the questions, you can review the question. Now let's review the questions, maybe you find it helpful. So it is saying that by means of high rating, I have opened the articles from your Times and I have put it here. You see that in your Times. Once, let me get back to the topic. So you go to topic 3 here. Here I have put article comprehension risk structure. Okay, so you go this in this folder. So I have put 2 articles. So if you see that it is 2 pages only, so it means that I have cut the whole article and I have kept only the pages that we need. And then the same is from this article. You can see that I have put only the introduction, the first page, and the implication, which is the last page. Okay, so let's get back to our questions now. It is saying that by means of high rating that they awarded to subprime mortgage backed bonds, the 3 major rating agencies, Moody's, SP, and Fitch, played a central role in the current financial crisis. Without this rating, it is doubtful that subprime mortgage would have been issued in such huge amounts, since a major reason for subprime lending boom was investor demand for high-rated bonds, much of it generated by regulations that made such bonds mandatory for large institutional investors. So which of the statement is correct? So before I read the statements, so let me explain for you that what does it mean. It is saying that overall it is saying that by means of high rating they awarded. This they means who, means that these 3 companies, Moody's, SP, and Fitch, they awarded a high rating to what? To these subprime mortgage backed securities or backed bonds. So you remember that we say that we discussed in the first topic that mortgage backed bonds, so it means that it's kind of like the banking institution, they have a lot of documents of the mortgages. So they put all these mortgages together and they bundle it as a new security, as a new bond. And they claim that this bond is very safe because it is backed by a lot of mortgage. And the mortgage means property, right? So they say that this is the safest bond, so because this is backed by a lot of properties. And these companies, these three companies, are going to give a very high rating to these bonds. And since they are giving a very good rating to these bonds, automatically what will happen? It is going to create a lot of demand for this bonding. So that's why it is saying that it is doubtful that subprime mortgage would have been issued in such a huge amount. So it means that if they wouldn't rate these subprime mortgage bonds in such a high ranking, so it was really doubtful if they could really sell this much of these mortgages. And the major reason for this for this large increase in sale was because of investors' demand for high rate bonds. Because of course, as an investor, once you want to buy a bond, definitely you're going to go and check the rating. Once the rating is high, so the investor will demand, and this increase in demand, of course, is going to increase the price of these mortgages. And apart from that, it was a kind of regulation in that market, in the US market at that time, that we can say that it was a wrong regulation, that they made it mandatory for some of the institutional investors to buy this kind of mortgage-backed bonds. So that's why it is saying that two factors, they contributed in a high demand for these mortgage-backed bonds. The first was the regulation, and the second one was the high rating. So which answer is the correct? It is saying that Moody's, Standard, SP, and Fitch played a major role to control the crisis. Of course not. They played a huge role in creating the crisis. Moody's, Standard, and HD mortgage bets and Fitch overrated. Yes, means that they highly rated these securities and created a huge demand for these bonds. So this is a correct answer. The other one is saying that increase in demand for mortgage-backed securities cause more mortgage lending. Yeah, of course, when there is a huge demand for them, so that's why, of course, the institution will be happy and they're going to go for selling of that bond. So that's why these two answer was the correct answer. Any questions so far? I also couldn't join. Miss, I couldn't join the game. And same here, I couldn't. Okay, can you please write for me that what was wrong that you couldn't join? That at least this time, I'm sorry that you couldn't join. At least next time I can do something. Okay, next question. It is saying that okay, my friend, one of your friend is again emailing me that couldn't join the lecture. Can you please, any of you, share the link again in the Telegram? Just copy and paste. If the Telegram is video, just copy and paste in the Telegram. I just answer her to click on the link in the Telegram. Okay, the next question is saying that the three large US-based bond rating agencies, again this Moody, SP, and Fitch, played a central role in financial crisis that began in 2007. These three agencies' favorable ratings were essential for the sale of the bonds that were securitized from the subprime residential mortgage. The sale of these bonds in turn was an important underpinning of the US housing boom, a self-reinforcing price rise bubble. When the house prices stopped rising in mid-2006, and then began to decline. The default rate on the subprime mortgage underlying the bonds rose sharply, and bonds that the three rating agencies had proclaimed to be the safest possible investment, other than treasury bonds, began to default, specifically bonds that they were based on the mortgages that they were originated in 2005 and 2006. These bonds were so widely held by banks that the decline in their value combined with the defaults on unsecuritized mortgages ripped apart the financial system of the United States and many other Western countries. So which statement can be, okay, it is wrong, sorry, it has grammatical error. Which statement can be, this is not needed, can be understood from the text. So overall, what do you understand from this? What we understand is that these agencies favorable ranking. So favorable rating, it means that they rated this institution higher than what they are in reality. And what were these institutions they were doing? They were actually bundling, they were creating a kind of security. That's why it is saying that they were securitized. So it means that they were creating kind of security, they were creating security out of these mortgage documents that they have. And they started selling all these securities. So what was the issue for these securities? Since there was a lot of mortgage regarding the houses, and they gave a lot of mortgage to the people, and the people started buying the house. So that's why the housing price started rising. So now the housing price is rising. Of course, it's a bubble, because the people that are buying these houses, they are not kind of eligible people to receive the loan, and they have loosened the loan requirements that they are able to give everybody a lot of loan. It creates a lot of demand for the housing in the market, and the house price has increased at that time. Then what will happen? So since they have given a lot of mortgage, they have a lot of documents, these mortgage documents, and they have rebundled this mortgage document. They securitize it as a kind of mortgage-backed bonds, and they started selling that bonds. But what happened that when of course the rise in the housing price was a bubble. So after a while, when the rise in housing prices stopped, so the people who applied for their mortgages, they feel that they cannot earn something, because they were thinking that the house price is going to increase and they can sell the house, and by this benefit that they can make, they can settle the mortgage and they can earn some profit. But once they notice that the house price is not rising, and then even it is declining, so they notice that they have to pay for the mortgage, and at the end the house price is also decreasing. So what they started defaulting on the mortgage. So it means that they were not paying the mortgage amount. So once they are not paying the mortgage amount, these institutions are not able to pay the interest of the bonds that they have issued. What are these bonds? These bonds actually a kind of bond which is backed by the residential properties, but actually this residential property is a loose residential property, because the people who have got these houses, they are not able to pay the mortgage, and that's why this is going to make the whole system to collapse. These people that they have got the bond, they are not able to pay the mortgage, and since they are not able to pay the mortgage, this bond issuer also is not able to pay the interest of the bond. And that's why you can see that they have increased a lot of, as this article is saying, there was a huge demand for these mortgage-backed bonds, because they were saying that this is backed by the residential property, so that's why this is very safe. But actually it was not, and it was only because of this over-rating, such a huge demand was created in the market. So now what we can understand from the text is that many banks bought the mortgage-backed securities, and that is why they remained safe during the crisis. Of course, it's not correct. As the agencies predicted, the financial institution defaulted on the bonds. Of course, the agencies didn't predict such a thing. Subprime bonds were source of the income for financial institutions, and therefore they were interested in issuing more of them. Of course, because once this financial institution, their lending, they are issuing these bonds, it means that they are getting money from the people. So that's why it is a source of income for them. But they don't know that once you are receiving the people money from the people, you have to pay the interest to the people. And from where they were able to pay the interest? From the money that they receive from the mortgage. Once the linkage is cut, it means that they are not able to pay the interest to the bonds. So it means that they have received the money from the people, but they are not able to pay back. And that's why this answer is correct. Okay, is that clear? Let me see. Internet was lagging and the quiz ended by the time I couldn't join. Same here. Okay, I'm sorry again, but it seems that the only thing that I can do is that next time I can increase the quiz timing, maybe from 1 minute to 2 minutes, but isn't it too much? But anyway, I'll do that for you. Then the second, I think with the explanation now it is easy for you to answer the second question. The result suggested that bond, okay, this is another article on bond insurance. The result suggests that the bond insurance on average reduce true interest costs significantly, and that the use of insurance during the stable market period, when the yield spread between lower and higher quality issues fall, does not reduce interest cost saving. I can understand if you feel a bit confused by reading this, so I can understand it. But anyway, one question: do you see the spread between lower and higher quality issues? So what does it mean? Do you understand? Today's topic, I show you the spread between low interest and high interest. It is talking about the same thing. So the yield spread. So it means that the spread means difference, right? So the difference of the interest rate, yield means interest. So the difference between the difference of interest rate between lower and higher quality. So what this saying, this is saying that, okay, let's read the answers. Insurance of some bonds increase the interest rate of the bonds. It is saying that when the market is stable, insurance of the bond is a must. Of course not, because it is saying that the use of insurance during the stable market periods, when the yield, the spread between these higher quality bonds and lower quality bonds fall, does not reduce the interest rate. Interest cost saving means that interest rate. Why it is saying that interest cost saving? Because interest rate for the issuer of the bond is a kind of cost. So that's why it is called interest cost. But it is saying that, this sentence is saying that when the market is stable, the difference, when the market is stable, this difference between high quality bond and low quality bond is lower. That's why it is saying that falls. So of course, when there is a kind of news in the market, as I explained in the videos for you, when there is a bad news in the market, since the demand for one kind of bond is going to decrease and demand for another kind of bond is going to increase, this gap is going to be higher. But once the market is stable, this spread between high quality bond and low quality bond is going to be less. So that's why it is saying that when the market is stable, the insurance on the bond does not play a significant role to change the interest rate. Yes, because the market is stable. But once the market is not stable, so in that scenario, if you put some insurance for the low quality bond, it is going to affect the demand of the bond, and therefore it is going to affect the interest rate of the bond. So that's why it is saying that the result suggests that the bond insurance on average reduces the interest cost significantly. So in which scenario? Not in the scenario that the market is stable, because the exactly next sentence after that, it is saying that during the stable market, such a thing does not exist. So that's why this third answer is the correct answer. And the Christopher Columbus is from Italy, yes. Then the last one is a less creditworthy municipalities seem to benefit the most in terms of lower interest costs from the bond insurance. A reason for this may be that the purchaser of the insured bond responds less favorably to the reduced default risk protection, which may be perceived as the difference between SPAA rating and the Moody's underlying credit rating of the insured issues. Thus, the purchaser of the insured issues may raise the required yield as the degree of the perceived protection decreases. Okay, I think that instead of me explaining this, it is better that you read the article about this credit rating here, I think. This is the article. You have to read this article first. And yes, I agree with you that during the quiz, maybe you didn't have the sufficient time to answer this question because it needs a full understanding. You have to read until you understand it. So I prefer to put it only this last question for the tutorial class, that I can at least give you some time and you read it, because I want you to develop the skill of understanding the articles. Okay, so do remind me in the tutorial class for this. Okay, let's get back to our slides now. I go for this. And here, okay, we have done the risk structure of interest rate, and we are moving towards the term structure of interest rate. So what is the term structure of interest rate? Okay, guys, before I go for that, are you fine? Are you feeling bored? Are you okay? Who was your friend who wanted to join? Did she join finally? Boop, are you here? Boop. If you are here, write in the chat that you're here. Guys, write something in the chat, whether you're fine or not. Are you feeling bored? Nazir, you are here. You say that I couldn't join. I'm here. Okay, Boob is also here. You couldn't join the quiz, you mean, Naziha? Okay, yes, Steve, what was the yes answer for feeling bored? Okay, you write something that I really don't understand. Yes, yes, here. Yes, yes. Yes, yes means that you're feeling bored, I assume. Guys, all of you are here. First of all, make sure that you join the Telegram group. Specifically, those of you that you have difficulty of joining the live class, please join the Telegram group, because we keep sharing the link, and specifically in the last minute, it is easier to communicate through Telegram. You can install the Telegram on your mobile or on your laptop or on both. And then what else? Yeah, and then this is the 4th week. Do you know that on the 6th week we have your exam, your midterm exam? If you feel that you need more time, so you can let me know. I'm very flexible to change your midterm, because I don't want to put pressure on you, so it should be your convenience. So let me know about it in the Telegram. Maybe we can chat more about that. Okay, so if you agree, let me discuss just a few minutes about the term structure of interest rate, and then we continue the rest of it next week. And as I said, maybe next week, instead of live on YouTube, I go for like maybe Google Meet. But I will get back to you about it. I have to make up my mind first, because I want to have it more like the lectorial. I can do some practice about the articles with you. Okay, now let's get back to the term structure. So the term structure was that we assume that the bonds they are issued from the same, for example, government and same institution. So that's why the tax consideration, the risk, and the liquidity of the bonds are the same. So the only difference between the bonds, we assume that it is about the maturity, about the term of the bonds. So that's why we are moving to the term structure of interest rate. The most important component or factor which we get in the term structure of interest rate is the yield curve. What is yield curve actually? Okay, before going to the yield curve, let's look at this graph. You remember previous graph was about the bonds, that the maturity of the bonds, they were the same, but the issuer of the bonds, they were different organizations, different corporations. Some of them were like AAA, high rated corporation, and some of them they were the low rated corporations. Now here you can see that this is about the US government bonds, but they have the different maturities. So you can see that, for example, we have the short-term bonds like 3 months bills, this green color, and at the other side we have, for example, 20-year bonds as well. So as you can see, and as we expect, so in the normal scenario, we expect that the interest for shorter term bonds is lower than the interest for higher term bonds. And this is where, for example, we can see here, of course, the interest for shorter term, or here we can see that the interest rate, this area for the short term bonds is lower than the interest rate for higher term bonds. But how about for like this area? Look at this area, that the interest rate for this higher term bonds is higher or even equal to the interest rate of these long term bonds. So that's why we are looking to find a kind of factor or a kind of graph or a kind of, we can say, indicator through which we can see that what is the prediction about the interest rate. Because as an investor, once you want to put your money in a kind of bond and you want to buy a bond, you should have a kind of understanding about the future of the economy, that what is happening in the future. So that's why with the term structure, with the indicator which is associated with the term structure of interest rate, so we are able to understand that what is the overall prediction about the future movement of the interest rate in the economy. So that's why we introduce the yield curve as the most important indicator in this concept. So what is the yield curve actually? It is very obvious that yield curve is a curve that is showing the yield of bonds with different maturities. Very simple. So it means that we are talking about two things. We are talking about a kind of curve which is showing first the yield, and since it is a term structure, so it means that it is showing the yield of bonds with different maturities. So that's why if we want to show you, for example, a yield curve, so I can show you a graph like this. It has, of course, like every other graph, it has two axes. The horizontal axis is time, term. We are talking about term structure, right? So that's why the horizontal line is term. You can see that it starts from 3 months and it ends to 30 years. And the vertical graph is yield, which is the interest. So that's why the graph which is showing the interest rate, the relationship between interest rates and year, it is yield curve. So do remember one thing, that when we are standing here, so whatever we are discussing about the interest rate here is actually our prediction. So that's why whenever we are talking about the interest rate in future, we use the term of expected. Because in reality, I know only the interest rate for today. Even tomorrow interest rate for me is expected interest rate, because I don't know the real interest rate, right? So the same is when I want to talk about the interest rate in 30 years, or the same is when I want to talk about the interest rate in 30 years. So whenever I am talking about the future, the term expected is coming. So that's why here I want to tell you that, I want to introduce you that we have the expected short-term interest rate, for example, somewhere near here. And we have the expected long-term interest rate, which is somewhere near here. So that's why short-term interest rate, expected short-term, it is talking about the interest rate on the lower-term bonds. Long-term interest rate means that interest rate on the higher-term bonds. So do we need to have a kind of understanding to predict about the future? Yes. Are we following this indicator? Yes. Economics and investors are very much interested in this yield curve, because this is telling them that what is happening in the interest rate in future. So now, how yield curve, how it can be? Yield curve normally can be like every other curve, can be upward slope, can be flat, and can be inverted. Inverted means downward slope. So we will discuss that, any of them, what is the meaning of any of them. But before going to explain about the yield curve, I want to tell you that regarding the yield curve, we have 3 theories. Those theories are very important. Somehow, I'm sure that you have studied in all your other modules. Again, if you don't remember it, you can listen here. And then we're going to practice a bit more detail about these theories. And these theories actually somehow are trying to explain the realities of the real world. So one more thing that you have to notice is that always as an academics, we are trying to link between the theories and the real life. And that's why once we are discussing about these theories, before that we have to show our observation in the real life. So now what are the observations of the real life? These are the 3 observations of the real life. So it means that in different countries with the, for example, the data of like 100 years of different countries, it has shown that the interest rate, it has shown these 3 different facts. So that's why we call them facts, because the real data, it has shown these 3 facts. So what we are trying to say, what we are trying to do here is that we assume, we know that these are the facts that we have. We want to explain these facts based on the theories that we have. So that is the work of academician we want to practice here. That how with the help of that theories we can justify investors' behavior, and then based on the investors' behavior we can explain these facts. So now what are the facts that we are trying to explain? The first fact is that the interest rate on bonds of different maturities move together over time. So in simple word, what does this mean? In simple word, it is saying that if bonds with different maturities means short-term bonds, long-term bonds. So it means that if we expect short-term bonds, interest rate on the short-term bonds to rise, so therefore the interest rate on the long-term bonds is also rising. So that's why we are saying that they are moving in the same direction. So do remember that in the articles, so this fact is not written in this way. For example, you can see that the wording is the same, is different, but the concept that they carry is the same. That if we expect the interest rate of 3 months or 6 months or 9-month interest rate, 9-month bonds in the market is increasing, so that's why we expect that the interest rate for 10 years, 20 years, and 30-year bond is also increasing. So in other words, we can say that when the short-term interest rate is rising, we expect that the long-term interest rate is also rising. Again, one more point. I'm talking about the short-term interest rate. I'm talking about the long-term interest rate. Do remember that all of them, they are expected interest rate because they are in the future and I don't have the real data on that. But based on this real data, it has always shown that when short-term interest rate is rising, long-term interest rate is also rising. So that's why it is saying that interest rate on bonds with different maturities, they move together. Done with the first fact. Second fact. Second fact is again something very obvious. Common sense, just use your common sense. If the interest rate in the market is very low, we expect that the interest rate in the market is going to increase in future, and vice versa. If the interest rate in the market is very high, so what do we expect? We say that this is the highest, or the interest rate is very high. So that's why we expect that the interest rate is going to decrease. And of course, always the role of the government is there. If the government is noticing that the interest rate is very low, so that's why they know that the economy is in the crisis. So they want to push the economy high. So they do kind of policies to make sure that the interest rate is going to increase. Vice versa. If the economy is in inflation gap, so it means that the interest rate is very high, the inflation is high. So that's why they put some policies to make sure that the interest rate is getting back to low level. That's why it's about factor 2, that if the short-term interest rate is low, so we expect that the yield curve is upward slope. What was the yield curve? Relationship between short-term and long-term. So when it is upward slope means that the long-term interest rate is increasing, and that's why we expect, because the short-term interest rate is very low. Other way, if the short-term interest rate is very high, so we expect that it doesn't remain the same always, and definitely one day is going to decrease. So that's why it is saying that we expect that the yield curve is more likely to have a downward slope, or it's going to be the inverted yield curve. In normal economic situation, so what is the shape of yield curve? In the normal, yield curve is almost always, do remember about this, that it is almost always a slope upward. So it means that almost always in a healthy economy, to motivate the investors to go for higher bonds, higher term bonds, we have to offer them higher interest rates. So that's why in normal scenario, we expect that the interest rate, the yield curve is of upward slope. So this is about these three theories. Then we have to, these three facts. Then next session, I'm going to introduce these three theories to you. And then based on these three theories, we have to explain these three facts. So then after I have, this is not much remaining about this topic, so we're going to complete it next week. And after that, we're going to read some examples and to practice it more. I will keep you updated about the next week through Telegram. So please join the Telegram group. And if you have any opinion, please freely share your opinion in the Telegram group. And I'll be more than happy to have your opinion and to receive your comments. So if you want to say something, please feel free to write here for me. I'm waiting for your update. How was today's topic? Did you learn it? Was it clear? Yeah. Digestible. Thank you so much, Sunyan. Okay, any idea, any opinion? Sharon. Okay, guys. Then See you next week. Have a good day. Bye bye.